Everybody. Hmm. So I have a little bit of good news, couple of positive things to say, and I'm going to save them for last because I'm going to say a lot of upsetting stuff before that. I don't want you to ride off into the sunset too terribly disturbed. And somehow I'm going to thread a little bit of what Joko was talking about into what I'm talking about today, but please feel free to chime in and add any thoughts or questions relative to what her teaching is. So one of the things she talks about is hope, right? In this section we've been looking at. And she must have known that this would be the moment that we would nominate Kamala Harris to be the candidate for president. So we've got this weird juxtaposition of things because those of you that paid attention to the Democratic convention last week, um, for me at least, that was a very hopeful event. And, this, again, not to digress into the politics of it, but I think, today we have a much better chance of not having another Trump presidency with all that would imply. And I can actually look at my little news feed again and not be devastated, So it's a better moment. But as she points out, hope is an illusion, right? It's not. It's something that we create in our minds. It's not, we believe it to be a product of the external circumstances, but it's not. It's a human mental creation. Now, my question is, and this is a question to all of you, is that bad? Is that wrong? Is that a problem? I mean, and I have an answer to that, but I'm going to halt for a moment and see. Anybody want to take that one on?
Um, I would say that it's a problem if you get attached to it. And if your hope, you build it up and you think, oh, this is it, which I can do have been doing a lot the past few days. And then I see something else and I think, oh, well, that's disappointing. So I think it's a good thing and something that we feel physically right now. I do. Um, but I think being the attachment to it and making an assumption that because I'm feeling hopeful, um, X, Y, and Z is going to all fall into place and my hopes are going to be fulfilled. So I think that's where the problem comes in. But otherwise, it seems like a positive emotion that is beneficial.
Anyone else want to reflect on that?
It seems like we do exist as psychological beings, as people in the world, and so we have all these feelings and thoughts about things, and hope is one of the more positive ones. but I agree with Susan, it can be a problem if we're attached to it too much. But we do live in the world with all of our psychological things happening. And
I have a bumper sticker that says you don't have to believe everything you think. So you don't only have to be attached to it. We can recognize what we're doing. It's still happening, but we're aware of it.
Peter, can you help clarify your question again? The group?
Jim, I didn't quite hear you. Are you talking to me?
Yeah, could you help clarify your question again, in terms of like, what's the central question you're asking?
What's the central question I'm asking? I don't know.
Okay, all right.
I think it's just this exactly what these folks have just addressed. Is it okay to have some hope? Is it, kind of like that? One of the things that I think happens in these discussions of emotions is that they're in our in our tradition, in our history, there's a tendency to kind of tank all the emotions in favor of sort of equanimity. And yet, I think Gary said it a couple of times, we're living in this world. And, you know, I would imagine it would be almost impossible to have watched that convention last week and not be a little bit exhilarated and have a little hope, especially in juxtaposition to the doom and gloom and horror and violence and hatred that's being projected elsewhere. And so and I think that's a human reaction. So now I'm answering my own question, and now I'll toss it back to you, Jim. But I kind of agree with the idea that that it's the attachment that's the problem, right? And we can't not attach to a certain extent, right? I mean, if there's two scenarios, one is Donald Trump blows up the world, and the other one is Kamala Harris brings us into a time of peace and love, and well, I'm going to attach a little to the latter, But that said, um, I need to hold that lightly. And we can constantly be on the escalator. I have this little device here, and it's constantly presenting me with the views of various pundits. Oh, the Democrats are right on the muck. Oh, the Democrats are out of their minds. Oh, they're, up and down, up and down, up and down. And if we ride that escalator, we're going nuts. So we do have to find a point for some equanimitous approach that allows us, I think, to experience, joy. They used that word joy last week. I'm a little bit prejudiced in favor of joy. I think it's a nice thing when we can experience it, you know. But again, if I don't want to, it's a rare enough feeling that I don't want to be attached to it because I'm going to be miserable a lot of the time if I'm searching for joy in my life. Okay, so that's Jim. I'm just going to ramble on. So I don't know if I answered your question in the midst of that or not, but
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think you did.
okay. Well, if I didn't, we'll be rambling around for a little while here, and we can come back. But I think this is really interesting questions about how our traditions were established by people who were monastic, who lived Zen 24/7, who did not have families, who did not have children, who did not do many of the things, who did not have jobs, who did not, on and on. so I think it's always a relevant question whether or not we want to modify the standard in some way. Not so much so that we're like, in perpetual suffering, you know. Many of the people that I've worked with over the years, many of my clients are in perpetual suffering. Every minute of every day is horrible for them. And obviously we don't want to go there. We don't want to see anybody else there. But is it okay to be upset if we have a loved one who's in trouble? And then to what degree? Is it okay to grieve when we lose somebody that we love? And if so, to what extent? I mean, I had clients, this is literally true, where they said, "Oh, I said, what's bothering you?" "Oh, I'm so upset about my mother dying." And I'm like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. When did she die?" "Oh, she died 10 years ago." Okay. So, so that after 10 years, well, we're all sad when we lose somebody, but if she hasn't resolved that core of her grief in 10 years and is still suffering from it, to me, that's a problem. If it's 10 weeks or 10 months, makes absolute sense. Again, this is my perspective. When we have a major loss in our lives, we just don't shrug it off and move on. But again, in that monastic life, that could have been possible. Very different. So anyways, so I'm off the mark of what I wanted to talk about, which is okay. I always am. But but a few things really twinged me in the past few weeks. There's a book that's just recently come out called Nuclear War: A Scenario by Annie Jacobson. Did anybody happen to catch the interview with Annie on NPR? She's a journalist, a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, and she did a book on nuclear war, as the title suggests. And she did incredible, extensive research. She went to the Pentagon. She talked to admirals and generals. She talked to civilian experts. She talked to scientists. I mean, she really did a thorough journalistic analysis. And the conclusion that she comes up with, and I don't, and in one sense, it's not startling, and in another sense, it's quite startling, is that the minute a single missile starts to fly, it sets a chain of events into motion that total annihilation is inevitable within a couple of hours. And I mean, she explains this whole thing, and I won't do it justice, but it's based on the fact that the time frames are so short. If North Korea launches a missile towards the United States, okay, the United States can't sit around, we've got whatever it is, 20 minutes till that missile hits New York or wherever it's going to hit. So we've got to respond, and we start unleashing our missiles. Moscow sees that. They see all those missiles headed towards their continent. They don't have the option of sitting around and waiting to see what those are going to do. So they launch, and on and on. And so what she very convincingly explains through all of this, there's no such a thing as a strategic nuclear war. Within a couple of hours, life is over. And whatever isn't exterminated there, the nuclear winter takes care of. And she says that even now even the bunkers aren't protective. Like there've been these, under the Pentagon in various places that there are bunkers. Now, those aren't going to do anybody any good either. The destructiveness of these weapons is so great. And just this morning, I heard an interview. I shouldn't listen to NPR probably, but I do every so an interview on NPR with a guy who, again, was ostensibly some kind of an expert with nuclear affairs. Because now, we've begun we're beginning the arms race again, the nuclear arms race. And China, he said, well, China only has a few hundred missiles, but they're building up their stockpile. And so, Russia has a few thousand, the US has a few thousand, but we need to build up more because China is building up now, and so on. And so for years we've had this mutually assured destruction thing. We have the overkill. We can kill every living thing on the planet 50 times over or whatever it is, but we need more. And then he listed the attributes that we need for a nuclear capability and a nuclear war. And the last one that he said was survivability. And I'm thinking, okay, this is ostensibly an intelligent man that NPR has on here as an expert on this subject. And he would talk early on about he has, family, kids, blah, blah, and he's got this idea that somehow this whole thing is going to be survivable. But I'm hearing that more and more now. More and more this idea that we can have a limited nuclear conflict, that we can have a nuclear conflict that we can survive. And way back in the 70s, we figured out that that wasn't the case. And things have not gotten better since then. So there, how's that take care of the hope? It seems that as a species, we're in some kind of a death spiral. And it's like a race, which is going to do us in first, climate change or nuclear destruction, or, there's the other things that are beyond our control. Like we could have an asteroid hit the Earth, or a massive solar flare that takes out all our electronic systems and things. But these ones are controllable. Now, the other thing that I heard this week some discussion on was Myanmar. And if you haven't been listening recently, there are atrocities going on there again. They're killing student protesters and so on and so forth. And of course, those things have been going on for several years. But to me, that, the whole thing in Myanmar is particularly disturbing because ostensibly that is a Buddhist country. And initially they were killing Muslims. Now they're killing their own people. It's, a pretty awful situation. Excuse me. And I was talking to Doug Bruns this week. Many of you know Doug. He'll be rejoining us at some point this autumn, I think. And he and I, we both said, years ago we had this belief that, there'd never been a war in the name of Buddhism. Yeah, Christians have had wars, and Jews have had wars, and Muslims have had war, but Buddhists never had war. Well, we squashed that one, didn't we? We now have Buddhist atrocities. We can no longer think, we're better than, or we're, we Buddhists are pure, peaceful people. So what does that do to our hope? Coming back to Joko and to the DNC and all those things, where's that hope? So at one level, it shows us that the hope is false. The hope is ephemeral. The hope is something that we concoct, right? It's not an actual outcome of circumstances or potential circumstances. And if we base our response to these terrible possibilities with hope, we aren't doing any good. We're setting up a false inevitability, a false standard. So here I agree with her absolutely, with Joko, especially at this global level. I think as Zen Buddhists, our obligation is to look at these things head on, in the light that they are in, and not, oh, we'll never do that. It's not so bad. No, we could do it. As a species, we've gone nuts. And so any possibility, no matter how horrible, is a possibility. But the question is not that. The question is, what do we do in response to that? How do we, in our lives, in our practices, in everything that we do, how do we respond to that? And my answer to that, as it is to most things, is we respond with loving kindness and compassion. That is the medicine. Will it be enough? Will it be in time? I don't know. I can't see the future. I can't answer that. But I feel like the only choice we have as practitioners, as human beings, is to continually respond with loving kindness and compassion. Can continually do all we can to help heal those around us who are fractured. To do our best as individuals to manifest the Dharma in the world, in our lives, to manifest the precepts in our lives. If there is hope, and if hope is even something desirable, it only can arise from that. What we as individual human beings do, and the collective effect of that action. The politicians are not going to save us. They're mired in conflict and confusion and greed and on and on. The billionaires are not going to save us. They are the personification of greed. So what is left is the power of the individual, the power of our choices, the power of being able to live lives of compassion and kindness. in the face of this absolute insanity. And I think also to be truth tellers. When people talk about things like survivable nuclear wars, that truth needs to be spoken. When people say climate change is not important, that truth needs to be spoken. But perhaps we're doing a lot just by not joining the collective sort of numbness and amnesia. Okay, now that I've ruined your Sunday, please feel free to comment or question.
I guess, Peter, I don't feel nearly as dire as you do. I'm not saying we don't have problems as a species, but I just view it as we're going through a transition. Sometimes those transitions are difficult. Sometimes you can really hurt yourself in those types of transitions as an individual can in their own individual lives. But I don't know. I don't feel the world's gone nuts. I feel the world's probably always been nuts, and that the difference is now we have the power to inflict real damage. But I don't know that the human psychology has changed in the last 150,000 years anymore in the last 100. So, but to your point, all we can really do is focus on our behavior. So I disagree a little bit about the politicians can't save us. I think leaders are really, really important. We saw that 4 years ago. It's the difference between leaders who believe in we and leaders who believe in me. And that's probably the most insidious part of politics today, the focus on me. So as far as the convention and Joko Beck and everything, that the kind of your opus on that, I think it just comes down to, yeah, we have to step into the world with the way we practice, because our leaders are important. The leaders are incredibly important. I mean, we saw that in the Cuban Missile Crisis. We saw that during World War II. We saw that during the Civil War. We saw that during the Civil Rights period. So the more we can choose leaders that don't cause any more additional suffering is probably the locus of my belief, and I would say our belief, which is what's attracted me to Zen Buddhism to begin with. And like Gary and others have said, as long as our attachment to that doesn't become our own suffering, then we should be okay. So I don't have anything more to add, other than I just don't feel quite as I feel what humanity is going through right now is quite natural. It just sucks that we're in it, right? But there will be another side to it.
I have to chip in more on the dire side. I agree with everything Jim said, except one thing is that all it takes is one crazy person with a nuclear bomb to start this chain reaction that will destroy the world. Yeah, so if we elect peace-loving leaders like Kamala and and smart people like Kamala instead of a narcissistic nutcase like Trump, there's less of a chance that we will start the nuclear holocaust. But unless we figure out a way to make it so that there aren't crazy authoritarian leaders who have nuclear weapons, this human psychology has not changed in 150,000 years, but we never had the capability of destroying the whole world before. We just had the capability of destroying a neighboring tribe. So, I actually had the idea that if every country was a democracy, then we wouldn't go to war. And that's why I actually voted for George W. Bush. I thought the Iraq War was the right thing at that time. Now I think it was really the wrong thing. The evidence has very much proven that. I don't have any answers or suggestions, but I want to practice and spread good around to the extent that I can, so.
I would add too that we've been living with this all of my life. I remember hiding under my desk in elementary school because there was going to be a nuclear holocaust, and somehow hiding under the desk was going to help. And we had bomb shelters as if you could come out of it to anything. And the book On the Beach, Neville Shude's On the Beach, was the end of humanity. We've had this hanging over our heads. We go through spells when we don't see it. We see it now, but it's always been there. And it's a tension that we just have to live with. We may well be destroyed by something else first. Who knows? Life is perilous. The only choice is to do the best we can, as you have suggested, and meet things with loving kindness as best we can. That's all I see.
And I think that hope can help us do that, because if we don't have hope, then we have despair. And if we have despair, we're just going to pull in and do nothing. But at least having hope that if I get out there and engage, I have hope that certainly that our government goes in a good direction this next election cycle. But maybe the bigger step is, okay, if it doesn't, do I have hope that I can continue to go out in the world? Because then there's going to be even a bigger need for loving kindness and compassion. And so hope in, I guess, one's ability to see that loving kindness or compassion is going to work on some level. And we still might be annihilated, but we can do something good between now and then. So I think it's more like, I don't want to say hope in myself, because then we're talking about self, but it's more that I can always help out somebody else in the world. And I'm pretty hopeful about that. Even though I fall in the dark camp of our species.
as you were talking, Peter, I was thinking, the reference to, hope being false. And I mean, despair is as false as hope is, right? I mean, they are both in some ways, emotions that we experience. And I was also reminded of Rebecca Solnit making the distinction between optimism and hope. Optimism is it's all just going to turn out okay, whereas hope is something that we can act on. And so it seems that this sort of how we make decisions, how we live, how we proceed is so much at the core of this teaching. And it also reminded me of the Zen Peacemaker's tenets, not knowing, right? I mean, there's nothing inconsistent between having hope and also remembering our practice of not knowing. And in some ways, I find it very important to come back to that all the time, particularly at times of feeling despair. And then, of course, the final of those three tenets is to proceed with loving kindness, right? What choice can I make in this moment that is moving towards loving kindness? And that could be how we interact with the person in front of us. I think it also can be how we choose our leaders, and how we, and what we, whether we do something, right? To quote Michelle, whether we do something to go forward, and do that. But again, always remembering, um, not knowing. And so, how will we act, given that?
Before we leave this section on Joko Beck, I just have to share a part that absolutely changed the way I think about things. That doesn't happen very often, but this did. And it was when she was talking about all our practice is to return ourselves to pure experiencing. And she had a discussion before that about our experience, and then that gives rise to certain behavior. And somehow I can understand experience better than emptiness, or even better than dropping mind and body dropping away. Experience, I can experience, and I see it as a verb rather than a noun. I mean, something that's just ongoing. And she then talks about our practice, talks about Zazen, and how when we're letting go of our thoughts, we are experiencing more, and it's the experience, pure experience, that opens us up. And it reminded me of the first sesshin that I did at Treetop, and I had only done one before that, and it was awful. But the first one at Treetop, it was really, really hard. I mean, sitting all those hours, and my mind saying, why don't you go home and sit in a chair open up a glass of wine or something. So it was hard. But as the days went on, I all of a sudden became aware of and I was staying at a hotel for part of it. The connection that I felt to the people in the hotel was almost overwhelming. As I drove to the Zendo, I passed by a Dunkin' Donuts, and it was early in the morning, like 5:30 in the morning, and people were working, and oh, my heart just went out to them. And I thought, this is so weird because nobody has mentioned compassion. No one's talked about loving kindness. And as they do in so many Buddhist sects, and we had not. And yet here I am filled with this. And when I read about Joko Beck's description of experience, if you're just in the experience, you just do what needs to be done and you're part of it. And that's where Zazen is taking us. And I just found that very hopeful. So I wanted to put in a plug for, at least to me, that was something that really resonated. Experience, the verb versus behavior. I guess that's a verb too, but it's I act this way or that way. So I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
I think I have something to say that maybe will bridge what you just said, Susan, to the nuclear holocaust thing we were talking about before. So, well, I guess in February of 22, was it that Putin invaded Ukraine? And what happened for me at that time was my neurosis kind of got stuck on, oh, the idea that, oh, now is the time. Now this is going to inevitably lead to nuclear war. So in the morning before sessions, at lunch, sometimes even 5 minutes in between sessions, I would be on YouTube videos watching about what happens when missiles are exchanged and what would happen in the, nuclear war. Then I was reading articles on stuff. I was like, just everything in my mind was because my fear was so activated. Everything in my mind was geared towards nuclear annihilation. Then I noticed it coming up in my sessions more and more, and I found myself with patients talking about nuclear annihilation, and I think I discovered that it was me that was bringing it up. And most time people would be apt to talk about it. They usually say something like, "Well, we're in trouble because we have Bath Iron Works," and I would say something like, "No, we're not in trouble because of Bath Iron Works. That's not even on anybody's radar. You're really in trouble because of the nuclear winter. That's good. You're going to want to be on ground zero." And I'm saying all this horrible shit, and I'm a therapist. And then one day, someone finally said, it's after months and months and months of this, and someone's like, "Why are we talking about this?" And I kind of had an aha moment, and I recognized that, my fear had completely, the great thing about being a therapist, if you can do it, is get where Susan's talking about, which is actually in the experience, which means you have to take yourself out of it, which I've been helped tremendously in the years I've been doing this. Because when yourself is involved, then it's not, I guess, optimal, certainly, but when yourself can be as out or as translucent as possible and just the experience, wonderful things happen. So anyway, I had this aha moment thanks to this teacher who's a client who said, "Why are you talking about nuclear annihilation in my session?" And then something happened with my fear, and I was like, "Oh, to hell with it! Oh, to friggin' hell with it! If this maniac Putin is going to do this, then that's it." And if you think about what actually happens in nuclear winter, then it's probably the most horrifying thing you can think of, especially happening to your kids and your loved ones and you. But I still have to find a way to be like, okay, to hell with it, and not have it occupy my every moment, my every moment, which it had, well, most moments, which it had been. So I was able to let it go and be more present in sessions, be more present with friendships and family. And will it happen? I don't know. Maybe, and it will be horrifying. But for right now, I'm going to be here listening to you folks, and then I'm going to go to brunch, and I have to leave, and I'm going to be present with my brunch mates, and then I'm going to be present mowing the grass as much as I can after that, which I think is the I don't know. I don't know. I'm just trying to tie in nuclear holocaust with what you were just saying, Susan. So there you go.
And Zazen. I mean, who would guess that that's really related?
Sometimes I think that Zazen may be the only solution, helping us live maximally while we're here. And that's true anyway, whether we end by nuclear war or by whatever we're going to end by.
And we are here now. This is it.
This is it.
This is it right now, with all the imaginings. This is the story right now.
Well, thank you all for your thoughts and comments. And responding with loving kindness and compassion is not dependent on the outcome. And I think that's the fundamental point, is that regardless of the possible outcomes, we have to go forward with those two qualities. And that's where our power, such as it is, lies. That's the capability that we have. When I said that about politicians and so on and so forth, yeah, there's better ones, there's worse ones. I absolutely understand that. The best thing to prevent nuclear war right now might be to elect Donald Trump, because he's buddies with Xi, he's buddies with Kim Jong-un or Kim Jong-il, he's buddies with Putin. They're not going to nuke us because they love Donald, and so, they don't love Kamala Harris, you know. So it's an insane world. We can't even do that calculus in a way that makes any sense, right? And uh, when we've got these crazy authoritarians, we can't predict reliably what they're going to do or not do. So we have, in my view, no choice to go straight forward, loving kindness and compassion, and do the best we can in our own lives every day. That's the only thing that we have any degree of control over, right? Everything else is completely beyond our control. Okay. So we'll end on perhaps a little brighter note. I did promise that. It's looking so glum right now. Okay. Oh my gosh. Okay. So we have an announcement. This week there was a ceremony, and Wild Fox Sangha now has 3 Dharma holders. And I'm going to explain first what a Dharma holder is, because it may be a concept that you're not familiar with. It's something, I don't know if it exists outside of white plum lineage, but it exists in white plum lineage. And it addresses a certain gap in that we now have both a liturgical priestly lineage and a lay lineage. And there are lay teachers in White Plum who are not priests. Okay. But if you follow the stages of transmission and practice, the priests go through first Tokudo, which is their ordination as a novice priest. And then the Shuso thing is sort of happening in a parallel track. And then eventually they reach a ceremony called Denkai. And at that Denkai ceremony, they become a senior priest. And that senior priest has a number of empowerments. They are a preceptor. They can give the precepts to other people. They can, the junior priest can't do a service without an immediate empowerment by a teacher. But once the priest has had Denkai, they can do services. They don't need approval or permission, and essentially all the priestly functions. Okay, but we didn't have a parallel thing in the lay track. And the Dharma holder is the parallel thing in the lay track. So the Dharma holder is not a teacher, but in a sense, the thing that I read with kind of makes sense. Well, they are kind of an assistant teacher. They have some of the authority of being a teacher. They can give talks. They can do instruction. And they can do those things independently. They could start a group. If they were so inclined. So it's a very significant and important step. So this week we had a ceremony, and 3 people are now officially Dharma holders, and those people are Susan and Deborah and Gary. Yes, you're allowed to applaud. This is a nice thing. And so hopefully over time, it's a huge step in many ways. You know, as I said to them, if you told me you were ready for this, I wouldn't give it to you because it's it's a huge step, a huge responsibility. Starting, you know, I go back often to the koan, not thinking good or evil. And in that koan, if you remember, that's where the monk Myo pursues Wineng, the first patriarch, and Wineng sets down his robe and bowl that he's been given on a rock, and Myo goes over, Wineng being this little grain grinding guy, and Wineng was a general, a warrior, and so on, and he cannot lift the robe and bowl. He cannot lift it. And why can't he lift it? Well, my interpretation has always been it's such a huge responsibility, that because that robe and bowl symbolized the Dharma, and it's picking up and carrying the Dharma. And Myo, just by what he's done, shows that he's nowhere near ready for that responsibility. He's angry. He's chasing Huineng, and he wants to kill him. And not, I don't think the Buddha said that. Okay, so therefore, he can't pick it up. Can't pick it up. Little puny Huineng can carry it. So to me, that speaks to the enormity of the responsibility when we pick up the Dharma, when we carry the Dharma, when we try to teach the Dharma. And we are never ready. And we will always fall short. And we need to understand that. We need to understand that. And, you know, and I'm saying, talking to Susan and Deborah and Gary, but to everyone, we need to constantly be unsure. We need to constantly ask questions. We need to constantly check ourselves. I'm debating. The reason I'm silent is I'm sort of debating. There's a little further segue here that I'm debating whether I'm going to. Yeah, I'd like to, if you'll indulge me just a couple of more minutes. It came up this week. I'll tell it really quickly, because it's something I've talked about before. You know, I saw my acupuncturist this week. Great guy and very deeply spiritually inclined kind of guy. And so he told me a story I hadn't heard before about Ram Dass and Trungpa. And apparently the story is, Ram Dass tells this story, and I'm actually not clear whether Ram Dass had said he was there or not. Ram Dass, in my view, I have a very high opinion of Ram Dass, and but I don't know if this was his firsthand experience or whatever. It doesn't matter. So the story is, Trungpa was in one of the Western states. I mean, he was in Colorado in Europa, but this was Montana or Wyoming one, and he went into a bar, and it was a cowboy bar, and he went in with all his saffron robes and shaved head or whatever, you know, kind of thing. And, you know, you've seen this scene in the movies, everybody's playing pool and they stop, you know, it was that kind of thing. And so he goes outside, again, a story, he goes outside, and there were three of the cowboys waiting outside for him, presumably to assault him or whatever. So the story is that Trungpa opens his mouth, and these three cowboys see the entire vast depths of the universe and are so stunned that they can't act or move, and Trungpa walks on. Okay. Interesting story. Again, I have no doubt about Ram Dass's credibility. I have great doubt about Trumpa's credibility. And I don't know such a thing, you know. You know, if I open my mouth right now, you're going to see my tongue, not the depths of the universe. And you know, is it possible? Sure. I don't know. I don't know what Tibetans can and cannot do. But you know, I got thinking about that afterward, and I got thinking, about all the horrible things that Trump had done. And I reread that. And it was kind of more horrible than I remembered it. It was just awful. And, you know, and sexual, not just sexual abuse, but actual pedophilia, you know, not Marjorie Taylor Greene style pedophilia. You know, children were hurt. So many people were hurt. And so what does it matter if you can see the depth of the universe in this guy's mouth or whatever he claimed, if people were so badly hurt? And many were, and many are still suffering as a result of that. So just like Buddhists in Myanmar are doing atrocities, the Dharma doesn't protect us from our human flaws, from our human mistakes, from our human inadequacies. And that's something, therefore, that we must do all the time. All the time. Part of why the robe and bowl are so heavy. Because it gives us the potential to even do more harm, not less, if we aren't vigilant, attentive, and yeah, and working with and living with the precepts. Anyway, so we have this wonderful occasion. We have these three wonderful people who are stepping up. And so you can ask them any question because they'll know the answer. And any time of day, you can call them, you know. Don't worry about the time change with Arizona or anything. Just if it's 6 a.m. and you got something on your mind, feel free to call and ask the question.
I just have to add that when Peter was talking with us about this next level and opportunities, all three of us said, we're not ready to do that. And Peter said, oh, good, because if you said you were ready, then you wouldn't be ready. So that's a Zen interview, I think.
Okay. So that's that. So I just created that. I didn't have a ceremony for that. You know, it's funny. I've only done one of the Dharma holder ceremony in it, and I actually don't even remember what we did for that. But unlike all the other things that have a very fixed ceremony, I'm not familiar with a set ceremony for the Dharma holder. So we invented it, and it involved turtles and all sorts of things. Anyway, okay, enough. Go live your lives.